Hi, I'm Al Charbonneau, the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Business Group on Health. Thank you for joining us in this important employer discussion, managing increased cyber risk with a remote workforce during COVID-19. I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors who support RIBGH work, including today's discussion. I know I speak on behalf of the Rhode Island Business Group on Health Board of Directors and our members when I say we are truly grateful to our platinum sponsor, Mercer, our gold sponsors, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Rhode Island, Hillbrook, New England, United Healthcare, Neighborhood Health Plan, Tufts Health Plan, and Aetna. Our silver sponsors, USI Insurance Services, Merck, Gallagher, and Delta Dental, and our RIBGH members, a growing group of 90 plus companies representing almost 80,000 employees. It is now my pleasure to introduce Linn Freedman, a partner with Robinson & Cole, and Donald Nokes, president of NetCenergy, who are our speakers today. Linn?
Thanks, Al. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Linn Freedman. I'm a partner at Robinson & Cole, and I head the privacy and cybersecurity team at the firm. And I'm also on the board of the Rhode Island Business Group on Health, and we're very happy to be here today to talk about a very timely issue regarding cybersecurity and the remote workforce. And now I'm going to pitch it to Don so that he can introduce himself, and then we'll get going.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm Don Nokes. I'm the president and co-founder of NetCenergy. We're an IT consulting and services firm supporting mid-sized businesses in southeastern New England. And I will turn it back to Lynn. Looking forward to the presentation today. Oh, just a quick side note. I also have served on the board of directors of the Rhode Island Business Group on Health for several years now, and very happy to and proud to be here to provide this presentation today. So back to Lynn.
Thanks, Don. So it's interesting because we've been getting a lot of questions, Don and I and all of you have been getting a lot of questions about managing your cyber risks, especially during COVID-19 and the pandemic and the additional risks associated with the pandemic. So we want to talk a little bit about that and try to give you some helpful tips. Again, we're going to try to be very, very practical today on tips around the risks. I'm going to talk a little bit about the risks, and Don's going to talk about how you can manage those risks. And a lot of people don't understand that in the transition from on-premises to remote workplaces that your cybersecurity risk is increased. So we'll talk about that, as well as the most recent cyber threats that I'm seeing and Don is seeing in the industry. We'll talk about high-risk data and how you can protect that data and think about that data from a security standpoint, basic cyber hygiene, tips for a remote workforce. And then the other thing that we're getting a lot of questions about from companies are, you know, as I transition back from a remote workforce to on-premises, and I am responsible to maintain a safe environment for my employees, what kind of information can I take from my employees from a health perspective around COVID-19, and what are the laws around that? So I'm going to just get into that very briefly because we're getting a lot of questions about that. I'm going to present first, then I'm going to pitch it over to Don, and then we're going to leave some time at the end for questions, and we'd like you to use the Q&A feature so that we don't interrupt the flow. It's harder on Zoom to do that, but use the Q&A feature and we will make sure that we'll do our best to answer all your questions at the end. So what are the present threats that we're seeing right now to companies' operations, infrastructure and data? The two highest risk areas that I'm seeing, and I have a global but primarily US-based practice, I'm seeing that because of a remote workforce, employees are a little more casual. They're more casual in their dress. They might be wearing flip-flops like I am right now. They might have a lot of distractions in their home because they've got kids there now that aren't going to school. They've got college kids, their spouses, their significant others. there's a lot of activity in people's homes, and now they're trying to also work. So because people are more casual, they're in their home and they're more distracted, I would say that the two highest risks that I'm seeing from a cybersecurity intrusion standpoint are unintended disclosures by employees because they're distracted. They're sending emails with attachments with a lot of information on them to unintended recipients, or maybe they're sending attachments that weren't supposed to be attached. We're also seeing just a lot of ransomware, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some ransomware new strains that are quite concerning. But hacking, malware, ransomware continue to be a very high risk for companies, and unintended disclosures by employees. The third highest risk that I'm seeing are actually malicious insider wrongdoing. What does that mean? It means one of your employees is actually stealing your data, sending data to their private Gmail account or other private account. They're stealing customer lists, they're stealing client contact information, secret sauce. Seeing a lot of insider wrongdoing because, again, I think people are they're not as attuned to the fact that their emails are being monitored, and they're sending things to their home email address, thinking that IT's not watching. So whenever that happens, and of course I get the call and I have to call and say, what were you thinking? I'm nicer than that. And they're always like, how did you know? Well, your employer has the right and the ability to monitor all the email traffic. And if you're sending things to your private account, it's against company policy and they're going to know about it, especially when it's highly sensitive data. So we're seeing an uptick in insider wrongdoing as well. And I'm seeing an uptick in zero-day vulnerabilities. What are those? Basically, I'm going to give you an example. Every Tuesday, Microsoft comes out with Patch Tuesday, and they send out to all of their customers who have Microsoft products, they send patches for vulnerabilities that have been found in those products in the last week. And a zero-day vulnerability is when a hacker has exploited a vulnerability that hasn't been patched by Microsoft as an example. I'm not picking on Microsoft. And they exploit it in the wild, which means they're using that vulnerability against companies before the company even knows they're a vulnerability or that the manufacturer has patched it. So we're seeing a lot of zero-day vulnerabilities. The important thing to remember about that is to make sure that your IT professionals are patching those vulnerabilities as soon as they're getting them from the manufacturer, and that your employees are also downloading the newest version of the operating system on their private phones, on their smartphones, if you are allowing your employees to access your data and your emails through their company phone. Still seeing physical loss, portable device, and removable media. These are the highest risks that I'm seeing in the industry. Technology intrusions continue to be a problem because companies don't have firewalls or spam filters, and we're seeing a lot of phishing, and phishing is causing the ransomware, malware, and man-in-the-middle attacks, which is when an intruder gets into an email account of one of your employees through a phishing email and a click on an attachment or a link in the email. They download malware that allows them full access to the email account. And then think about it, it takes 206 days on average for a company to understand that they've been a victim of a cyber attack. And in 206 days, think about how much information an intruder can get to your business. They'll know who your vendors are, who your customers are. And a man-in-the-middle attack is when they try to get in the middle of an email trail, for instance, AR, accounts receivable, and an invoice. They'll cut and paste the invoice. They'll say it's from them and send you new wiring instructions. And it looks very real. It's very sophisticated, and millions and millions of dollars have been lost through man-in-the-middle attacks. wire transfer fraud continues to be a problem. And skimming incidents are around website skimming incidents where malware is introduced into a company's website that's doing e-commerce and getting payments on through their website, and they have malware and they can grab the credit card information and the CVV code before it goes through your website. We're seeing quite a bit of that. And then obviously vendors and subcontractors continue to be a risk for companies, because if you're sending personal information or sensitive company data to vendors and they don't have appropriate security protocols in place, if they have an incident, a security incident, and it's your data, it's really your problem. So if you don't have a third-party vendor management system, you should be thinking about that, because your vendors and your subcontractors continue to be a high risk for you. So what is phishing? Everybody knows what phishing is, but phishing continues to be the #1 way that an intruder can introduce malware or ransomware into a system. And what I'll say during the pandemic is that phishing schemes have increased exponentially. They're incredibly sophisticated. There are actually companies that will provide for a fee URLs that match almost identically to real companies, and they'll change one letter, or they'll make a company that has 2 E's in it into an M, so that it's very hard to identify. And I've unfortunately had this experience more than I want to for clients, and we end up sending cease and desist letters to these companies, but they don't go out of business. They're still selling fake URLs. So your employees, especially in a remote workforce, really need to be given tools, education, and training around phishing and how sophisticated it is. They need to feel comfortable to be able to reach out to the IT professional to say, I got this phishing email, it looks suspicious to me. And what I find is a lot of times someone will recognize an email as a phishing email and just delete it, but they won't actually send the email to the IT professional. If it got through the spam filter, it got through to more than one person. You want your workforce to be telling the IT professionals about every phishing incident so that they can blacklist that email and make sure that others don't click on it. So you want to have a partnership between your employees and the IT professionals. It's a team sport. This is a team sport. And also to provide your employees with updates on new sophisticated phishing schemes, also on ways to prevent a phishing attack and a successful phishing attack. Spear phishing is when they actually do some research on your company and find out who is working with whom, and they literally spoof the email and really try to make you think that it's that person, and the familiarity. In a remote environment, it's much harder to walk down the hall and say, did you send me this email? Why do you really want these W-2s? Why do you really need all this, highly sensitive information? It's much harder now, and people are going faster and more distracted. So make sure that your employees know about both phishing and spear phishing. I talked about malware. That's when they get in there and they kind of crawl around for a long time and gather all sorts of information. Ransomware is when they get in through a phishing attack and they drop a ransomware note, and usually sometimes it's immediate and sometimes it's not. I'll tell you a second about a really awful ransomware group. But ransomware is when they are able to get into your system. They lock it down, they encrypt your system, they don't give you the keys unless you pay them a certain amount of money via Bitcoin. If you don't have a robust backup system to migrate to following a ransomware attack, you literally don't have any access to any of your data. So ransomware now is again through phishing, which is why it's so important for your employees to understand the most recent phishing attacks. Insider threats, I told you about. Island hopping is when they hop from one victim to the next because they have so much information when they're in your email system that they know what the real emails are of other people, and they just hop to the next victim. I always say if I wasn't afraid of jail, it'd be a really great way to make a lot of money, but I'm afraid of jail. So I'm going on the record there that I'm not going to the dark side. Let me tell you about Maze. It's just awful. But so Maze came out last fall of 2019. And basically what they do is they get in through phishing. Someone clicks on a link or an attachment. They introduce the ransomware, but they don't implement it right away. So they get in and they crawl around. They use artificial intelligence and other forensic tools to find all of your high-risk data, such as social security numbers, driver's license numbers, financial information, and they exfiltrate it. So they're able to get it out of your system and get it into their system. And then they drop the ransomware note and say, you are the victim of ransomware, pay us this many millions of dollars in Bitcoin and you can have access to your data. And if you have a robust backup system, you say, which is what I love to do, go pound sand, we're not paying you the ransom. And they say, oh, well, too bad for you, we already have your data. So, and you do this through a third party, don't do this yourself. Do not negotiate with cyber attackers yourself. There are third parties who do it well and do it legally. So you go back to them and say, no, and they say, we have your data, and you ask for proof of life. And that means they actually show you that they have your data. And they say, if you don't pay us for a certificate of destruction, we're going to publish all of your information on the dark web for anyone to see and for anyone to use. And you're going to be in big trouble. So you basically then have to pay a ransom to get a certificate of destruction to cyber criminals. I know it's an oxymoron, it really is, but this is the way it works. So far, I will say that as far as I know, and I watch them very carefully, as far as I know, they have not gone against a certificate of destruction, but when you don't pay, they do publish your data on the internet. And there have been multiple companies in the United States who've been the victim of that. And sometimes you'll see, or people who are watching the dark web for you will see that they publish information and then it'll be gone the next day. And it's presumed that the ransom was paid. So again, I can't stress enough the importance of employee education here. So what's the high-risk data I care most about? From a risk perspective, personal information is the highest risk data. I believe we're going to be providing the recording of this webinar so that you all can have access to it as well as the slides. This is the information that if there's an unauthorized access use or disclosure of, all 50 states would require you to notify the individuals, and some enforcement or regulatory agency. What I will also point out for you is many states are now including biometric information. So if you're taking fingerprints of your employees, you should be aware of that. And if you're located or you have a facility in Illinois, you should be super aware of the Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act. Very specific requirements. And there's lots and lots of class action cases on that. Financial institution data, health and insurance account information. In the state of Rhode Island, health information is included in the definition of personal information, so be wary of that. So let's talk about your remote workforce and a little bit more about what I think you may wish to consider prioritizing. Many of your workers are using unsecure Wi-Fi connections. Or an unsecure router. They haven't changed the password of their router. Don's going to get into more details about this, but now that your remote workforce is using their own equipment, you need to make sure that they're still following your guidelines around security, making sure passwords are up to date, and with mobile devices and Alexas. I'm very concerned about this. Everybody's using their smartphone now remotely. It's, you know, exponential. You're allowing them to get access to their email on their smartphone. If you don't have a bring your own device program, you may wish to consider implementing one so that they understand what the guidelines are, and using a mobile management software tool so you can remote wipe your information from the phones is super important. Your employees, I will tell you, I do a lot of employee training. Your employees don't understand in many instances, and maybe you don't either, that when you download an app, it will ask permission to access your microphone, your location-based services, your camera, your telemetrics, your movement. In many instances, employees are downloading this and saying, I agree to access to all of these very, the ability to get some very personal information. But from a professional standpoint, be thinking about the fact that if your employees have downloaded Instagram and Facebook and other apps, Uber apps, that request access to the microphone or the camera, that means that they have access to everything your employees are talking about in their home or anywhere. And in a secure remote setting, you don't want you don't want these apps to be recording all the information about your business. So the other thing that we're seeing is people are using their Gmail account. I really would like to impress upon you to have procedures in place that employees are not to use their Gmail account, because Google rightfully when you download and do a new Gmail account, and I'm not picking on Google, it's any private email account, they have access to all the information that goes through that account, and you agree to it and give permission when you agree to download that app. Many people don't know this. Make sure your employees are aware. Laptops, USB drives, portable hard drives continue to be high risk. You don't want employees downloading a lot of stuff on USB drives or anything on their hard drive. You want them to use your VPN. Don's going to talk more about that. And I talked about BYOD program. What I really want to talk about is Alexa and Echo. People have these listening devices on in their homes, and they're listening and they're recording and they're sending everything back to the manufacturer, whether it's Alexa or Echo or any others. Make sure that people are looking around in their workspace. They might be in the attic, they might be in the kitchen, they might be in lots of different places. But if they have these IoT devices on, all of your company data is being transmitted to these manufacturers. And from my perspective, that's a real problem with confidentiality. And Don's going to talk more about, IoT devices and the risks. I want to quickly just talk about now transitioning from remote to home. Remote to on-prem. As you're transitioning your employees back to the office, you have an obligation to provide a safe workplace under OSHA. And as such, there are lots of different vendors out there who are trying to get companies to use their products and services for the transition back. And I get a lot of questions about, well, what do I do if I'm taking temperatures of my employees? What do I do with that information? You have a lot of information already from your employees. You should treat this information just as you would any other information. What I will say is be transparent with your employees so that they know why you're collecting the data, what data you are collecting, and only collect what you need. Be very careful about collecting information that you don't need. Be transparent about it with your employees. Keep it only for the amount of time that you need it, and then get rid of it, because you don't want this information. You really don't need temperatures of your employees more than 14 days or 21 days at max. Have a record retention system in place so that you're only collecting this data for as long as you need it. make sure that, you know, as far as collecting the information under COVID, it would be the same as any other information that you're collecting from your employees, such as health screening, background checks, drug screening, security clearance. But I would recommend, and this isn't legal advice, right? So as your friend, I'm recommending that you only keep this information for as long as you need it and not just put it in someone's personnel file, because this is highly sensitive information. You should be securing it and protecting it like this other highly sensitive information, but don't keep it as long as others, okay? It's similar to substance use drug testing, but again, only keep it for as long as you need it, and really be transparent with your employees. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna pitch it over. How did I do? Not bad. I'm pitching it over to Don. So I'm gonna stop sharing now and go on mute. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, give me just 1 second. We'll be up and running here. Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you, Lynn. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Don Nokes. I'm the president and co-founder of NetCenergy. And we started our company back in 2003. And lately, it's been a lot about cybersecurity. We've been playing defense for an awful long time lately. And I started in this industry in 1980. And that was actually before the internet. So it was before all these criminals were getting into our data. So it was a long time ago. And so people say, well, you've been in business since 1980 in this industry. You must know an awful lot about the technology and be a very smart guy. But other people say, well, you've been in the business since 1980. That means you're very old. So whatever the case, I'm going to go over some of the things that I've learned in those many years. And hopefully we'll give you some good information that you can help keep yourself safe while you're working from home. So clearly there's been a tremendous increase in cybersecurity. We're seeing it very, very rapidly just in our local newspaper. I don't know if you saw, the Care New England was out of commission with their networking system for 1 week. They had to resort to pencil and paper, and it was a very, very, very disruptive attack that they had to go through. So we're going to talk about that recent activity increase. We're going to talk a little bit about the security differences and get into some specifics about what it's like when you have security systems in place at work and what's happening as we've migrated to working from home. I'm going to put some checklists in place for you so you can assess your current risks by working from home. And then we're going to talk about some best practices that you can employ to keep your data and your reputation safe as you work from home. So, you know, we've actually quantified some of this increase in activity. Firms like ours and other firms have actually documented that we're seeing a 15 to 25% increase in hacking that's going on today. Just the World Health Organization alone has seen a 5-fold increase in cyber attacks to their website. And of course, the hackers right now are capitalizing on our thirst for this COVID information. That's why the WHO has been so targeted. But what happens is, you know, they'll send out information. It might look like it's coming from your HR department. It might look like it's coming from WHO, but they're trying to get you to sort of, in your thirst for this information on COVID, to click on items that you shouldn't be clicking on. And sorry about that. And get you to basically go to a site that's really infested with viruses, so that when you go to that particular link, you go to that particular attachment and you load it in, you're going to get a virus. So in far too many cases, we fall for these things. And as Lynn mentioned, really understanding and having your employees understand about phishing is a key to decreasing that risk. The other thing where the vulnerabilities come from is from newly discovered bugs, and Lynn talked about that 0-day discovery. And basically when those systems come out, someone has to identify them and has to get the bug fixed. So if you're getting those 0 days, you're getting it when it newly comes out. And the best way to solve that is to patch those devices early. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. And I want to mention, though, that working from home, and we talk about this, how it does increase risk. And Lynn talked about how what that means is you get a little more confident, maybe you get a little more careless because you're working in your home instead of in your office. And that's one thing that you have to be diligent about and make sure that you don't fall victim to that. The other thing that people keep saying is, well, who wants my data? I'm a small company. No one really wants my data. But you are a target. You're a target because hackers have learned how to monetize your data. They've learned how to take that data and hold it for ransom and publish it, as we heard. And so even if you're a small organization, your information is very important. And in the days past, when you heard about the big Target hack, where they got in through their HVAC system, and it was a big company that got hacked. A lot of these companies have spent a lot of money improving on their cybersecurity. So so that the hackers are shying away from going after the big paydays, and they're going after the small, higher quantity paydays, and that's small business. So we'll talk a little bit about working from home and what the differences are in the technology, but just to get a sense of working from home and how that's increased. In the 1980s, less than 1% of Americans primarily worked from their homes. By 2017, it increased up to 3%. And so take a guess at what it is today with all this going on with COVID. I mean, we really are looking at a 62% of Americans are primarily working from home today. That is a tremendous number. So I don't expect that this work from home is going to go away anytime soon. And I really think that the prevalence will stay high until we really have a vaccine. But while studies show that actually productivity from working from home can increase, what they've also clearly proven is that your security decreases. So let's take a look at what the differences are when you're working from home versus when you're working from the office. Now, when you're working from the office, your PC is likely fully monitored and managed by either an internal IT team or possibly an outsourced IT team. And when they do that managing and monitoring, what they've done is they put on some tools, some security tools like antivirus, like email filtering, web content filtering, to ensure that you're running the latest versions of those and to make sure that you're running the latest versions of the application software and your operating system software. They also should be providing you with regular user training, but more importantly, they should make sure that that business computer is being used for business purposes only. Now, there's also components in the office that you use to connect to the internet, the router, the firewall, wireless access points, and they also must be managed and maintained by the IT security team. And let's just take a look at the way it looks in your office. Let's look at the little diagram here. So typically what you'll have in an office situation is you have people's PCs, your coworkers' PCs are connected to a switch, and then they may be connected to an on-site server where all of your applications and your data is being stored. Or many cases today, the diagram on your right shows that you have your users all connected to the cloud. So whether you're using a desktop or a laptop or a tablet, those applications and the company's data may be stored out in the cloud. And in many cases, we actually see where there's a hybrid approach. There may be many of your applications are out in the cloud, but some of the old legacy applications might still be on site in a server. And again, those are very controlled. You have your IT people are watching those and they're keeping them up to date. But as we move away from that controlled environment and we get to the home, things change. First of all, I think the most important thing you need to do is make sure that your PC that you're using is for business use only. If it's not for business use only, if you don't have the company that's providing those tools, those security tools like antivirus and keeping them up to date, then you are definitely more at risk. So you also need to consider what else is being connected to the internet from your home. It's not just the endpoint, not just your computer. You also have other items like your firewall and your wireless access points and that sort of thing that is going on in your home as well. So I want to just take a quick diagram here and show how most people actually connect from home to office. And there are two basic ways that this is done. You've heard of VPN. VPN is a 20-year-old technology, stands for Virtual Private Networking, and it's really a way for users to get data from point A, your home, to point B, to the office or to the office systems in a way that when it's going along the public network, no one can sniff out those packets. No one can sort of intercept that information and read it. So what we do is we set up a system on either end that encrypts on one end and then decrypts the data on the other. It's, I've heard the good analogy of it's like driving a car down a public highway with tinted windows. You're still using the public access, but you can't really see what's inside. And that's the way VPN really works. But the really important thing about VPN is that if you're starting with a PC or a laptop or a tablet that isn't secure, it doesn't have all the virus protection, it doesn't have all the updated security going on, then you're basically providing a very secure tunnel to go from an infected machine back to your office. So it's very important that that VPN device on the home end is fully secure. If not, there's another alternative that a lot of companies use in connecting remotely, and it's called remote control. And so the other diagram will show you what we mean by that. So basically what happens is you have potentially an unsecure laptop or desktop at home, and what you do is you take control of a PC in the office, so that that unit is really the only thing that's communicating with the servers and with the data, and all you're doing from home is sending screen changes and keyboard strokes. So that sort of assists in keeping the company data a little bit more secure if they can't be sure of what's going on with that laptop at home. So we'll take another look at the home computer. We've talked about the security of your PC or your laptop and the security issues related to the way you connect. But again, there's those other devices in your home. There's the internet service provider who has probably provided you with a router or a firewall in today's world. But a lot of us have older equipment in our homes that perhaps we bought our own router, we bought our own Wi-Fi router, and so those access points. So those are not necessarily up to date. I had planned to actually go through and talk about how you can go in and check to see exactly if you've been updated and exactly what you're using for a password, because a lot of times where the vulnerabilities come into play is these older routers that we're working at home with, they had standard passwords put on them by the companies, and hackers know what those standard admin passwords were. And if you haven't changed those admin passwords on those devices, then you're basically very vulnerable. And what I found is that in order to go in and change those passwords, you have to know what your original admin password is. And as these devices get older, that data, that information about what you have for admin passwords kind of gets lost. So if you're currently using a router that you provide or a Wi-Fi access point that you provide, you really should try to get in and see if you can get to the admin password and change that and make sure it's not a standard password. If it's that old that you can't find it, I would really recommend that you look to get either a new router or Wi-Fi router, or that you talk with your ISP. Today's ISPs are providing those routers and Wi-Fi points for you. And most of them, Cox, Verizon, even Comcast, has applications that you can use from your smartphone. And you'll be able to actually see who's logging onto your Wi-Fi. And you'll be able to lock them out if they're on. So I would encourage you to talk to your ISP if they're the ones providing you with your router, and be a little bit more active and engaged in the security of those devices. It's very easy to do, and those application programs that those providers are providing for you are very, very easy to use, and they're very efficient and very effective. So Lynn mentioned a little bit about IoT devices, and there's an old joke in the IT space that says the S in IoT stands for security. Well, the joke, of course, is that IoT devices are made with one really main feature. They want you to be able to buy this device, bring it to your house, set it up, and get it working immediately. It's all plug and play, and they want to make sure it's easy. Well, what I've found over the years in this business is the easier something is, it's very likely to be less secure. And the more secure something is, it's a little more complicated to install. So what their main focus is to give you these devices, make them easy to plug and play and get going. But the problem is that they sometimes come with admin passwords that are standard for those devices. They sometimes come with passwords that that maybe they're random, but they're not that difficult to guess. So it's really, really important that when you have other devices, and there are 25 billion IoT devices out there today, when you're putting those into your network, that you have taken the time to understand exactly what their login codes are, and you're changing them to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more difficult to guess. These devices provide a tremendous gateway into your home network. And once they're into your home network, of course, and you're connecting back to the office, you're basically putting all of that at risk. So be very, very careful with these IoT devices. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to keep track of them. So in these next few slides, what I've done is I've taken sort of a work from home checklist. What I'd like you to do is go through this and make sure that these are things that are being covered today for your home network. You want to check your current router's age and see if it's been updated. We talked a little bit about that. Confirm your router firewall is not using the standard password. This is one of the biggest vulnerabilities we have in working from home. You also want to set your home Wi-Fi to WPA2 or WPA3. When you connect with your smartphone, it'll actually tell you what kind of configuration protocol you have. So check that out. Check your Wi-Fi password. Ensure it's not the default password. Use separate Wi-Fi for business use and home use. Now in my own home, I actually have 3 Wi-Fis. I have one Wi-Fi that I use for work. I have one Wi-Fi system that I use for all of my IoT devices. And then I have another Wi-Fi that I use for guests who want to come in and just connect up temporarily. So again, maybe that's a little overkill, but making sure that my Wi-Fi for work is separate from every other Wi-Fi that I'm using at home and my grandchildren are using on their laptops. Those are the kinds of changes and configurations you want to have to ensure that your business use is segregated. And then finally, I think you want to keep a list of other IoT devices that are using your Wi-Fi. You want to make sure that you've changed those default passwords, and you want to have that separate Wi-Fi for work connections. Those are just really important. I've said it a couple times because it's really important. So this is sort of the checklist for network equipment. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about restricting the assessment for your endpoints, for your laptops, your PC, whatever you're using to do work. It's really important. I said it enough times. Restrict your laptop to PC or work use. Use a long passphrase instead of a short password. I mean, this is something that you've seen more and more of. The old 8 letters, upper lowercase, numbers, that's sort of going away because they're hard to remember, to going to a long passphrase. Something like a lyric that you like or an opening line of a poem that you like. It's really important to have something that you can remember, but it's also longer. 16 characters is really good. You know, if you're on Facebook, you could have a password that has something to do with a lyric about friends or something like that, so that it's kind of tied to what you're logging onto, but it's a passphrase. If IRS login, you might have another one bites the dust, something like that. You know, some kind of a passphrase that you'll remember, and that's long enough that you won't be as vulnerable for people who are doing brute force attacks and trying to guess your passwords. So you want to maintain the same security practices as if you were in the office. So many times you might be sending a document from the office, oh, I've got to encrypt that. But at home, you might be a little bit more lax. You want to make sure you don't fall into that trap. Encrypt is necessary. You also should accept multi-factor authentication whenever you're prompted. Now, this is really a major help when it comes to getting hacked. If you're just logging into a site and it just has your password, realize that if anyone gets that password, they're getting into that site as well. What multi-factor authentication does is it'll send a text to your phone. That's the most common type of multi-factor authentication. It'll send a text to your phone, and then with what you know, your password, and what you have, your phone, and that 6-digit code that they've sent you, you now are much more secure. Now, I'll just talk a minute about this whole multi-factor authentication. There's been more activity going on with this and more development going on with this now, because when you actually send a text to your phone for multi-factor authentication, what's actually happening is they're not sending a text to your phone necessarily, they're sending a text to your phone number. And with a lot of these SIM hijacking that's been going on with phone numbers lately, that does allow for hackers to get at that 6-digit code. But it's much more secure than just not having just a password alone. So I really recommend multi-factor authentication. And you're going to see lately some new equipment coming out, some new tools that are coming out that are going to allow you, there's a USB stick you can plug in and the codes change, and it's not necessarily tied to your phone number any longer, but it's tied to this little device that you would keep on your key ring. And those are very inexpensive and they're very, very effective. So you're going to see a lot more activity going along in the multi-factor authentication as development happens there. Well, of course, we talked about maintaining your operating system, your antivirus, and your other application security patches, and making sure that they are completely up to date all the time. If you have an IT company, they're doing that for you. But if you're working from home and you don't have that available to you, it's something you need to take on. Go ahead to the Microsoft site, check for updates. It's very simple to do. You also want to check with your company IT team before you load any applications. In the industry, they call that shadow IT. Applications that you're running from home or running from your PC at work even that they don't know about. It creates a significant vulnerability for their work IT, so you want to make sure that you share with your company any other applications that you're putting on. So the last work from home checklist that I listed was really just a general checklist. And I wanted to make sure that people understood about Alt F4 or Command Q if you're using an Apple. If you're on a site and all of a sudden something comes up that looks a little suspicious to you, maybe you can see a file loading or there's something that's going on that you're concerned about. Now, a lot of people are familiar with that little red X in the right corner. Now, the way software programmers write their programs is they'll typically make that red X an exit. But that red X could be download now. It could be really a vulnerability for you. So if you're finding yourself on a site that you want to get out of quickly, with a regular Windows PC, you could hit Alt F4 and you will exit right from that program. And Command Q does the same thing from Apple. So what you're actually doing is instead of using the program to exit out, you're using the operating system to exit out of the program. So that's a much safer way to get out. For example, if you're watching this webinar now and you were to hit Alt F4, you would close this application and you wouldn't see us anymore. So, but that's what it does. It just closes out immediately and doesn't rely on the application to close out. So staying diligent regarding phishing emails is critically important. Be aware of vishing. If you haven't heard that term, it's basically voicemail or phone phishing attempts. We tend to give out information via phone still a little bit too freely. You have to be very diligent when it comes to either email phishing or voicemail phishing. And of course, report anything suspicious as soon as possible. So the last thing I wanted to touch on was security awareness training. It's really important. This is where a lot of people mess up. I've talked to so many of my clients who have had issues with cybersecurity issues, and they've said, you know, I knew better. I knew I shouldn't have clicked on that. I knew I should, but they were in a hurry. It was the end of the day. There's some other reason why. And I think security awareness training, what it does besides teach you what the new threats are, what the new evolving risks are, what security awareness training does is it just sort of keeps it top of mind. It's something that lets you know, oh boy, I've got to stay on top of this. I've got to remember this. And that every 90-day training at minimum is something that every user should be getting. So we also, for our clients, we basically measure by testing, sending out phishing attempts to see if they'll fall for it. And that's very important to do, just to get a sense of how easy your employees are identifying what could be a real vulnerable attack. So make sure that you are getting your security awareness training. And if you don't have it from your company, there's lots of on-site, lots of YouTube videos that will help you stay vigilant and understand what the latest threats are. So according to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, we know that there's a lot of new activity going on with work from home, and we know that there's a lot of vulnerabilities that happen. We've covered them all. We've given you a checklist. I hope you'll find that helpful and that you'll actually take the time to go through and see just what is the state of your work from home environment and your work from home equipment. So last thing I wanted to do was provide a couple of resources for you. There's some links here that will take you to some FTC information on working from home and keeping yourself secure. There's a website out there that I like to use. It's called haveibeenpwned.com. It's a PWNED, have I been pwned. What you do is if you put your email address in there, it'll actually list for you any sites that had been hacked and your email address or your data, your information was provided. It's really kind of interesting to see just which sites have been hacked that contained your email address and your information. And you can see just how vulnerable you might be out there based on how often your email address has been hacked. There's a couple of videos here. The first one, the first YouTube video, is takes place in a coffee shop, and it really drives home the impact of social media and how much of your data you're putting out there via social media and what hackers can do with it once they have it. It's a short 4-minute video, but it really drives the point home and tells you a little bit about how to handle your privacy settings on your social media programs. And then the second one there is a pretty interesting video on YouTube, and it actually shows a hacker who has been hired by a company to see how vulnerable they are. And it actually goes in and shows you how easy it is for a hacker to get into your company network. It's a little scary, but it's kind of interesting to see, and it's very educational. Finally, the last YouTube video is from Frank Abagnale. Some people may have heard of Frank Abagnale. He is had a movie made about him that Leo DiCaprio starred in called Catch Me If You Can. This is a great 1-hour interview with Frank Abagnale. Really interesting information about how he did his work, how he became one of the most famous identity thieves in the world. And you learn a little bit more about how he did it and what you can do to make sure you're not a victim. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it back over to, I guess, Al or Joanna to see if we have any questions. Thank you very much.
If anyone has any questions, please type them into the Q&A, and we're happy to have Don and Lynn answer them for you. And while we're waiting for questions, there is a brief survey, so I'm going to launch a poll just on feedback of the presentation today. So your feedback helps us determine future presentations and modify any of the ones that we have. I'm not seeing any questions come through. Were there any points that you'd like to make as in closing, either Lynn or Don?
Go ahead, Don.
Okay. Well, basically, the important thing really is to make sure that you're taking the time to look at what you're doing. Be careful about what you're doing out there. And you know, there's a lot of equipment in your home. Make sure that this is the key thing, really. Make sure that that equipment is secure and is constantly being up to date. That is the most critical thing. And then, of course, watching out for phishing attempts. They're happening all the time, and they're getting very, very good at it. The last thing I would say is check out your social media. Make sure you've got the privacy settings there, because hackers use the data that they gather from your social media to trick you into giving out other important information that they need to help get into your systems.
I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about, the TikTok videos? A lot of people working from home, they have a little more spare time because they're not commuting back and forth, and they're participating in those TikTok videos. How secure is that if you're using the same PC that they might be using for work?
I think Lynn, you had some comments on that yesterday.
Well, yeah, I mean, and TikTok is, well known to be the Chinese government, basically, and it is insecure. I'll let you talk more about it, Don, but I would be very, very careful about using TikTok, allowing your children to use TikTok, or any other app that you can download that is well known to be insecure and also to be something that is sponsored by a foreign government. So what I'm finding is a lot of people are downloading these cool new applications, but unfortunately, they're not doing any research about them, not only on the information that's being collected, but just doing a basic Google search will give you a lot of information about the controversy around certain apps. So I'll pitch it back to Don on that, but I would prohibit TikTok and think that I feel very strongly no one should be downloading TikTok.
When you're using videos, services like this, there's a thing called content delivery network. And TikTok uses unsecured content delivery networks. So what can happen with those unsecured CDNs is people can slip videos, sort of man-in-the-middle attacks. They can slip other videos in that aren't real, that are just fake videos. So once they get, you think they're looking at your video, and because of the content delivery network is not secure, you're looking at something that's not there. You have to really be very careful when you're looking at TikTok. It's not something that's secure. They've proven it. There's several vulnerabilities there, and that is something that I would really stay away from if it were me. Again, those content delivery networks, if you don't have secured content delivery, you are leaving yourself open. And if you're using that service, then you're vulnerable.
And I would also say, Joanne, just as a, I guess, follow up on my last comments, there are millions and millions of apps out there, and people are downloading apps every day because they're cool, or they're the newest thing, or their friends are downloading it. And no matter what your generation is or how knowledgeable you are or not, everyone should be doing basic research on their app, on any app that they're downloading, and in particular, going into your security settings to determine what permissions you've given those apps. So what I always say at the end of these presentations is go into your security settings, look to see all the apps that you've given permission to your microphone, your telemetrics, your movement, your location-based services, and your camera, and understand that if you don't turn them off, they're on at all times. And so I find that people don't understand apps, don't understand the information that they're providing to apps, and don't understand how to only have that information shared when you're using your app. So go to your settings after this presentation and look right in there to see all of the apps that you've given permissions to, and you'll be surprised. I think you'll be very surprised what you're allowing access to. And that would be my takeaway for this presentation. And tell your employees too, because they don't know either.
Mm-hmm. Even sites like that, Rakuten is another thing that they're advertising out there about getting cash back, and how secure is that? Because I imagine you're giving your bank account information or some way of them sending you a payment for your shopping. And I'm sure they're also monitoring all your shopping patterns because you're going in and shopping through stores. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I don't know specifically about that, but what I will say is when you are using any application, whether it's a website application or something on your smartphone, they are required by law to tell you how they're collecting your data, what they're collecting, and how they're using it. So go to their privacy policy and take a look at what they're doing with your data, but I'll pitch it back to Don on the security of that particular app.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the research on the Rakuten app, that I will do that now. That it's interesting me, but any of those apps, what I typically do is I'll go online, and you'll find out, for example, like TikTok, right? The U.S. government prohibits use by U.S. government employees to use TikTok. So that kind of information that you find when you check online for these things is really valuable, and you really should take guidance from that. Back in the day, you'd get these videos on Facebook or whatever, and I would go to Snopes.com. Okay, Snopes.com is a site that would validate whether what you're seeing is real or not. And I used to get so frustrated when people would take these data that they learned, or these videos, or this information, and they would just send it out to all their Facebook or their social media contacts without ever validating that this is real or this is true. To me, it's just unprofessional, and you really should be validating any app that you're using, and validate any of this data that you then go ahead and share, because it's really easy to do, and it just takes an extra minute, and you could basically save yourself an awful lot of problems by just taking that extra minute to validate those things. So use the web. It does work. And when the government says they're not using it, and they, New York City schools will not allow Zoom to be used. I mean, those are the kind of things you should probably pay attention to, and maybe dig in a little bit and find out why that's the case before you adopt those programs.
Okay, well, thank you both very much for taking the time to do this webinar. It has been extremely informative, and I think people have learned a lot, and as has indicated in the poll. So we're at 1 o'clock now, and I didn't see any questions come in, so thank you for your time, and we appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you as well.
Joanne. Thanks,